The United States National Soccer Hall of Fame used to be located in upstate New York, in the town of Oneonta. It was just down the road from Cooperstown, the iconic home of the Baseball Hall of Fame. But the soccer hall didn't get a lot of spillover, maybe because it was in the middle of nowhere and also hideously ugly. Imagine finding a giant rocket that's plunged into the ground so only the bottom is sticking out, and then saying, okay, how can we turn this into a combination Costco, church, and snowplow shed? Oh, and let's also have a 20-foot-high soccer ball blasting through one of the walls in a way that will give kids nightmares. We'll put a link to a photo on the episode page, and you will see what I mean. Somehow, that absolute hellscape failed to become a big tourist attraction, and it closed in 2010. Its collection of thousands of pieces of U.S. soccer history was scattered across the country, including a warehouse in North Carolina. And it is there that our story begins, a few years later, as an intrepid soccer historian hops in his car in New Jersey and types the address of that warehouse into his GPS.
You've just maligned one of my favorite places, the Soccer Hall of Fame, but let's talk about that soccer historian. How would you describe him? Handsome? Rugged? Still fit for his age?
You seem very invested in this bit of casting, so I'm going to say I'm looking for a Colin Hanks meets a potato.
I've been told I look like his father.
And I'm going to ask whose father, Colin Hanks or the potato?
All right, well, you look like Judge Reinhold, but I'm not sure people will know what that means anymore.
I know, from Fast Times and Beverly Hills Cop to blank stares from millennials. Humbling for us all. Speaking of movies, picture that Raiders of the Lost Ark map of an airplane flying over the ocean. Its path marked by a red line, right? But it's an Audi driving down Interstate 95 looking for the holy grail of American soccer.
That Audi's driving through a hurricane, so the red line is going to stop at a Motel 6 in Virginia to spend the night. Safety first, kids. Don't be a hero.
The next day, having made it safely to North Carolina, the historian walked into the warehouse and was overwhelmed by row after row of shelves, stacked with boxes containing thousands of our game's most precious artifacts. The first box he opened had Pelé's game-worn Cosmos jersey.
Pelé has scored in his last half for the Cosmos.
The museum also held Mia Hamm's cleats, the oldest soccer ball made in the U.S., mementos of the U.S. team from the first World Cup in 1930,
and the full costume of the 1994 World Cup mascot.
He's talking about Stryker, the Scooby-Doo-esque dog.
Yes, but with those weirdly tight shorts. I can neither confirm nor deny if that historian tried the costume on, or if it had been washed since 1994. But none of that is what the historian was after. Finally, combing through a row of filing cabinets, he found photographs of a silver trophy, around 13 inches high, topped by a Roman athlete, a runner with a ball and a goal post on either side. On its front, in a large shield, the inscription, Trophy for the American Football Association, 1884.
This was the AFA Cup, the oldest trophy in American soccer, one of the oldest trophies in the world. And as far as most of the world knew, it had disappeared. But then the historian found something else, a printout of a map, step-by-step driving directions to an address in Texas. Would our hero find treasure there? That was a question he couldn't answer, unlike, what does the inside of Stryker's head smell like? So he decided to drive on, but he had no idea his journey would take him all the way back to the earliest days of American soccer, a time of wool shirts and chamois jock straps, when, like our historian, towns, teams, and players would do almost anything to get their hands on the AFA Cup.
This is An American Game, Episode 2, The Trophy Hunt. Okay, there are a lot of characters in today's story, and obviously I'm one of them. So I just want to start by saying Stryker's head smelled like Stryker's feet.
That is Dr. Tom McCabe, my friend, the talented goalkeeper I backed up in college, and one of the world's leading experts on American soccer history. He's been a professor at Rutgers, he currently teaches at Notre Dame, And he is the former president of the Society for American Soccer History, which is a fancy way of saying top soccer nerd.
Yes. And my partner is Kirk. A longtime Hollywood screenwriter who's helped produce shows like Will and Grace and American Dad. And yes, once I yelled at him for not giving me good enough service in a preseason drill. We share a belief that soccer is an American game with a long history that even diehard American fans don't know.
Whether you grew up loving the game or found it later in life, you may have felt some pushback from people who don't think Americans have a claim to the sport, that we don't really deserve it, that we couldn't possibly understand it.
So we're telling a few stories from U.S. soccer history, sharing our lore, if you will, that we hope will give you a reason to be a little prouder, cheer a little louder, and own your love of the game. Remember, soccer was in New Jersey before it was in Brazil. Today we're talking about the oldest trophy in American soccer, the American Cup, or as I prefer to call it, the AFA Cup. And we're doing it in the same room.
Very exciting. Tom lives in London and I'm in LA, so we're used to working from different time zones. And we've built a whole production schedule for this series around us being 8 hours apart, while our producer, Matt Nelson, patiently manages everything from Boston. But we both had family excuses to be on the East Coast, so we figured let's all meet up in Newark, since that is where today's story starts.
And we're sitting in a room at St. Benedict's Prep, where I used to teach. Best job I ever had, 17 years of teaching and coaching and school leadership. But it's also part of the American soccer story. St. Benedict's boys soccer is one of the most successful programs in the history of not just high school soccer, but high school sports. They've had great players like Tabaré Ramos, Claudio Reyna, Greg Berhalter, loads of others. They've won 15 national titles. Anyway, always good to be back and good to see you, Kirk.
Good to see you too. Let's talk about the AFA Cup.
Subject near and dear to my heart, like Benedict's. I've spent years researching and writing about it. A book entitled The Dear Old Mug is due out by the World Cup.
I got to ask you, which World Cup? 2026 or 2030?
I'll admit it, I tend to over-research and underwrite, but I feel it's going to be worth it because partly due to my research, the AFA Cup may finally see the light of day.
We are not just breaking news today, we are making it. But before we get to how the Cup ended up in a safe deposit box in Texas, let's talk about how it came to be at all, which is not quite as simple as you might think.
Well, that's part of the reason why it took me so long to research and write the book. History is a study of what gets left behind. And U.S. soccer doesn't give a historian much to work with.
Because history is also written by the winners, right?
Exactly. Until recently, soccer had gone through a long period where it wasn't a winner here. Historian David Wangerin called it, quote, the red-headed stepchild of American sport. Not much was preserved from American soccer's early years, so you had to look in the weeds, in the margins to find its stories.
And when you're a historian digging in an under-researched area with very few tools, I imagine it's hard to know when to stop, right? When to give up, because you never know when you might find something new.
Let me give you an example, Kirk. When I began studying the AFA, which was the first governing body in the United States, the accepted history was that it had been founded in Newark, New Jersey in 1884. I mean, literally, less than a mile from here, either side of the Passaic River. At a meeting in a firehouse of the Clark Thread Company, it was so poetic, the spark of the American Football Association was lit in a firehouse.
But, as I understand it, there was very little documentation. So when one old source had that story, everyone after just cited the first guy. And it built this kind of inertia, right, of well, that's what happened.
But turns out that the date and place were wrong. A friend of mine sent me an old clipping which confirmed that the first meeting didn't take place at the firehouse. It took place a few weeks earlier in New York City at the Caledonian Club.
Which doesn't sound like a huge deal, right? It's just a few weeks. It's a club, not a firehouse.
But that club was a Scottish-American society, which meant that at its inception, soccer had a heavy Scottish influence. Not just English, as most people believed. That impacted whose rules Americans would use. In a place like Kearney, New Jersey, you'd see the Scottish rules. And in other places that were more English, like Fall River, Massachusetts, you'd see the English ones.
And it would also influence how they played, right?
The English prized dribbling and individualism. Those university old boys, posh and well-fed, wanted all the glory for themselves. They'd put their heads down and dribble until they lost the ball. The Scots, however, usually smaller because, frankly, they're more likely to be working class and have poor nutrition, they had to use their wits and their technique. They privileged passing and moving the ball around. It's all in the Netflix series, The English Game. The Scotch professors coming down from Glasgow to teach their game. It's also got class conflict, that whole upstairs-downstairs dynamic. And look, historians want to get the history right. It wasn't only an English game when it hit our shores. England wasn't the only home of football. And if we didn't even know when the AFA started, what else don't we know? What else might be wrong?
We just want to establish that soccer came to the U.S. a long time ago, and there's a lot that even historians are still learning about it. So, here's where we get to the treasure. Tom was studying the history of the AFA, but there wasn't much left behind to study.
Fortunately, the AFA was closely connected to the football associations back in England and Scotland. So I had a hunch that there might be some stuff about the AFA in their records. So in late 2020, during the pandemic, I traveled to Preston North End Football Club, founding member of the Football League in 1888, and, importantly, home to the National Football Museum archives. I sat in a little room and went through the annual reference books published by the FA. Bang! An entry from the FA's annual guide in 1884. Quote,
"The association game has made great progress in the United States. Last year proved to be the most successful since the association rules were introduced. There are now 9 clubs."
Remember, the association game or association football were what they called it. And then English university students, the posh Cambridge guys, shortened it to soccer.
The 1885 guide reported that the AFA's first officers, copying the English and Scottish FA Cup competitions, raised funds for, quote,
"A splendid Challenge Cup."
That's 1885? See, people say we have no soccer history in the United States, but here was a cup competition with a trophy from Tiffany 140 years ago, which means the AFA Cup is not just the oldest American soccer trophy, it's the oldest American sports trophy, period. The America's Cup is older, 1851, but it's technically an international competition. And the Stanley Cup was first awarded 8 years later, in 1893.
And the Stanley Cup has been given out continuously, so credit to hockey, our hockey friends, but it still makes the AFA Cup pretty significant. As I was digging deeper, back in the States, I saw a photograph of a guy named Harry Holden with the cup in that very first year. He was a player for Clark Thread Company, as well as an officer in the AFA. And Clark Thread would become the country's first soccer dynasty, winning the cup 3 years running, 1885, 1886, 1887. There was something about Holden, though. He grabbed me, posing with the trophy in his leather boots, his cotton breeches, and a woolen jersey. He had this glorious mustache, and he was obviously so proud to have won it. The AFA Cup represented the pinnacle of a whole era that has just been lost. Obviously, I wanted to know more about it, and since the Hall of Fame archive had been boxed up and shipped to North Carolina...
Tom, this sounds like a treasure hunt.
Let's call the quest.
Because, look, this trophy was no joke. The AFA spent almost $8,000 in today's money to make it. It was 67 ounces of sterling silver designed by Tiffany & Company, the world-famous jewelers, even then, who would later make trophies for the NFL and the NBA.
The trophy had a Tiffany stamp, a maker's mark on the underside of the base. I was able to get someone at Tiffany to look at their old ledger books and confirm all the details. But I also learned that, technically the trophy was made by a Newark silversmith named Gavin Spence. I mean, his shop is literally blocks away from where we're sitting. In the late 19th century, Newark was the jewelry capital of the United States. So Tiffany sometimes was so busy they had to subcontract orders out to other shops.
The first AFA Cup champion was crowned in 1885. A month later, Tiffany actually formed its own team, Tiffany Rovers. The side was mostly artisans and silver polishers and usually got knocked out in the first round. But the point is, everyone wanted the cup, even the people who made it. And pretty soon, what started out as a local competition, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, expanded throughout New England and Pennsylvania. Now, let's draw a quick sketch of what the game was like back then, as they were playing for this brand new trophy. I think even if you didn't know this American soccer history existed, you would probably picture like factory workers in woolen breeches chasing an old heavy leather ball around on a dusty city lot. Keepers with no gloves. Hard fouls.
Let's put a little more color on that sketch. Let's start with that equipment. The ball was usually made of brown leather. I always like to think that the stitching would have come from Clark thread. Good quality balls were really rare. And my favorite story about a ball is the one that I call the precious spheroid. Men from Macclesfield, a northern English textile town, settled in Paterson, New Jersey, not far from here, just north on the Passaic River. They wanted to kick a ball around in their limited free time. So they formed the Paterson Football Club in 1880. Problem was they couldn't find a ball. So they asked their friends who worked on a steamship to bring one over from Liverpool.
Not exactly Amazon Prime.
No. It arrived a month later, though, at least I think, and they kicked it about on a plot called the 40 Acres, just outside of downtown. The baseball folks didn't like it all that much. They wanted the field to themselves, right? It was a turf war. They called those English immigrants sparrows, which in that era was apparently a derogatory term. And there was this baseball-soccer conflict. Sometimes baseball players would grab that soccer ball and boot it down the hill.
As we've said before, and we'll say again, the American soccer story mirrors, for better or worse, the larger American story, right down to hostility towards immigrants by people who themselves might be just a generation removed from getting off the boat. So, in the 1870s, their version of red hat wearing dipshits would steal the ball and kick it away.
And the Paterson FC guys would have to chase after it because it wouldn't be easy to replace. They'd be waiting for that next round trip from Liverpool. Eventually, sporting goods stores sold them. But that's why they called the ball their precious spheroid.
Spheroid.
Spheroid. Spheroid. I do accents too. Come on.
Love it. All right.
Yeah.
I know another thing could be hard to find back then if you were a proper club was a convenient opponent.
Which is why sometimes clubs would have to divide themselves up for a game. And they'd find creative ways to do that.
Like when we would play small-sided games in college in the off-season, and we'd split into, tall guys versus short guys.
Yes, I used to love those matches. Trees versus trolls. Back in the early days of U.S. soccer, clubs might play married versus single, one part of the factory versus another, first part of the alphabet versus the second, and my favorite, sinners versus saints. I mean, who decides that?
There's a story you've told me, and coincidentally also about Macclesfield, but it's the kind of thing that could have or probably did happen in the U.S. at some point. I think one day an opponent couldn't make it to town for a game due to a railway accident, and so the host club split into married versus single.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, but back then they called it Benedicts versus bachelors.
But at halftime, one of the married men got a telegram that his wife, who had been visiting family, had been killed in that railway accident. The train hit her wagon or something. Horrible tragedy. So the now widower said, I got to go to the crash site. But the next train wasn't for hours. So his friends convinced him that he couldn't bring his wife back. And, hey, maybe it would be a good distraction if he just played the second half, which he did. But they had him switch teams and play for the Bachelors.
Tough way to change sides, but it was a tougher game back then.
Let's talk a little more about what soccer looked like in the late 19th century in the U.S. I love this stuff because there is so little that's known about it.
I'm glad you love it. Not everybody does, but we have an incredible look at the game through a pamphlet that a friend of mine and friend of the podcast, Kurt Rausch, sent me one morning. Came as a PDF and an email, and its cover read, Constitution, Bylaws, and Laws of the Game of the American Football Association. It was published in 1888 by Peck and Snyder, a sporting goods store in New York City. So it's a rule book that's also a catalog for uniforms and equipment.
It's incredible that it survived till today.
Yeah, as a piece of paper or ephemera, maybe more incredible than the trophy surviving, really.
And going through the pamphlet, you can see that, like for cleats, players would get high-top boots, either heavy leather or canvas, both with wooden studs nailed to the bottom. Canvas would run you $2.50. Leather was $5.50, which is about $140 today. Not a bad deal for top of the line, considering what Nikes and Adidas cost.
Yeah, but those leather boots, you couldn't run around in them for 90 minutes. Harder still in inches of mud.
Couple other interesting things in the catalog. Football pants came in canvas, corduroy, flannel or worsted wool, none of which sound good.
2 shows in a row that we've mentioned the word worsted. That has to be a record.
I think if we hit 3, we get sponsored by worsted wool. I love this page in the catalog. Jock straps, 50 cents for a regular, 75 cents for linen, and $1 for chamois. And personally, I would shell out for the chamois. That sounds amazing.
Last time I wore a jockstrap was college. You, Kirk?
Last week, but not for sports.
I believe it. The catalog also features heavyweight woolen shirts and jackets. A reminder that the season started in October and ended before the baseball season began in April or May. This was another carryover from the English-Scottish game, where football was the game you played when the cricket season ended. You couldn't bowl a cricket ball on a muddy or frozen wicket, so many cricket clubs founded football teams to have something to play before the spring. In the United States, baseball was the game of summer, which ended in the fall, so soccer got the winter months. It was called, quote, the outdoor winter game. That meant that bad weather could postpone the AFA Cup matches for weeks at a time. And when they played in snow, teams would smoke and drink tea to keep warm at halftime and literally take off their overcoats before stepping onto the field.
The spectators had to be tough, too. They'd also be out there braving the elements, whether it was rain or sleet or snow or even the occasional heat wave. And they'd come out. A cup match between big rivals like the 2 Fall River teams or clubs from Kearney could bring 2,000 to 5,000 fans, and they'd have bookies roaming up and down the sidelines to keep things interesting.
Sometimes too interesting, like when Pawtucket played Fall River in a cup match. Back in 1889, 6,000 fans jammed the Pawtucket Free Wanderers grounds, an AFA record at that point. And one of them, later described as a fiery redhead, bet a month's wages. And his team was getting crushed. So he blamed the ref.
Well, of course, who else?
And then he runs on the field with a knife. He eventually gets tackled by the police. And once he's cleared off, play resumes.
Funniest thing to happen to a ginger till Alexi Lalas got kicked in the nuts against Mexico in '97.
I do remember that. That was painful to watch, but funny as well.
So that's a little sense of what the game was like in the 1880s and early 90s. And for context, in 1887, when ONT-FC was winning its 3rd straight AFA Cup, Italy was just getting its first football club when a merchant named Eduardo Bozio returned from a trip to England and started a team in Turin. Spain didn't get one until 1890, when Scottish expats celebrating Robert Burns Night with some locals in a Sevilla cafe made a drunken pledge to form a club. A year later, 1891, was when Uruguay got its first club. And the other AFA, the Argentina Football Association, wasn't founded till 1893. So, the Scots and English were bringing the game around the world, but they brought it to the U.S. pretty early.
And as we're talking about this, keep in mind that the AFA Cup was only a small slice of the game here. It was for serious clubs with talent, ones that had enough confidence to pay that $5 entrance fee and all the associated travel costs. And since the country was so big, it precluded Midwestern teams from participating. So the AFA Cup wasn't a truly national competition. But St. Louis, Chicago, and other places also had vibrant soccer scenes.
Now, for teams that could play for the Cup, it was a big deal, like one of the legendary teams of early American soccer, Fall River Rovers.
That's Fall River, Massachusetts, also known as the City of Spinners and Winners. It's a textile town like so many of the early American soccer towns. Rovers won the Cup the first year they entered, in 1888. And when they returned home from Newark, a parade of over 200 soccer players was waiting for them. And a makeshift banner was strung across the main drag. Welcome home, champions of America.
Okay, I think we've made it clear soccer was big in the U.S., and the ambition was even bigger. But 10 years later, the AFA, first dominated by a team of textile workers, was hanging by a thread. The Panic of 1893 was still hitting working-class industrial towns, the ones that nurtured and supported the game the most. And with less factory work available, immigration from the British Isles, the lifeblood of early American soccer, dried up. After Arlington FC won the AFA Cup in 1898, the trophy made its first disappearance from the historical record. Was it lost? Stuffed in the back of a closet? Find out in the second half of Treasure Hunt from an American Game.
You're the English major. You know the fancy word for hanging by a thread?
What's this going to be?
Philippendus.
Ah. Philippendus?
Kind of like pendulous, but with a Philip in front.
Okay. Philippendus.
Philippendus. Tremendous. Stupendous.
I didn't know you rap.
If you like what you're hearing, click to follow an American game so you won't miss any future stories about U.S. soccer.
This is our history, and we think people should know it. So we want to share it with you. And if you like it, we hope you'll share it too. So, mash the like button, drop us a rating, tell your friends, etc.
I've got a PhD, so you don't have to.
That's right. Every episode will give you something to impress your friends at the bar or your next pickup game.
So subscribe, like, and share, and we'll keep the stories coming.
Okay, we're back in 1898. The AFA Cup competition is shut down, and the beautiful sterling silver trophy has disappeared. Where did it go, Tom?
Can't know for sure, but I have a theory.
I love when I can nudge you from nerd facts into exciting theories.
Got something for you. My theory is the trophy was pawned.
Exciting. Tell me more.
So there's this guy, Jack Swithenby, a star on those Clark Thread teams. He actually scored the goal that won the first AFA Cup. He's a native of Bolton, England, played on a club there that competed against the best English clubs like Blackburn Rovers and Preston North End. And I did a search for him. Swithenby is kind of a odd name, and a match report from 1884 comes up, and it mentions Swithenby being subbed out because he had to catch a ship to the United States with his father and his brother. Joe was also a player. They were processed at Castle Garden, the precursor to Ellis Island, and they may have looked like just a couple of sparrows, but I suspect they were brought over for soccer. Because a few weeks later, Jack and Joe are in Kearney playing for Clark Thread, whose team was called ONTFC, for Our New Thread.
There's something fitting about the first U.S. soccer dynasty being Our New Thread. As we've looked at U.S. soccer history, you have often compared it to a tapestry, where the backside is just a jumble of frayed knots and loose threads and chaos. And then when or if you can turn it over, then you can see the patterns, and sometimes the beauty of it. Anyway, tell us more about Jack Swithenby and why you think he pawned the AFA Cup.
Swithenby started life as a spinner at the mill. He was actually a spinner back in Bolton too, but his fame on the field in the United States led to a career as a saloon keeper. He was player manager in 1898 for Arlington when they won the Cup. So it makes sense that he's the last guy to have it when it shuts down. The Cup would have been put up on a shelf, maybe in his bar. He's the Sam Malone at Cheers, the local legend. A few years later, though, he sells that saloon and opens up a combination bar hotel on the other side of the mill. That's a big move coming out of a recession. So if he was short on cash to fund it, the Cup would have been an easy thing to pawn.
But then in 1905, a team from England, Pilgrims FC, made a tour of the United States and Canada that gave soccer a huge boost. Thomas Cahill, the father of American soccer and our friend from episode 1, helped organize it, and in the aftermath, the AFA reorganized and relaunched. Wherever the Cup had been hiding, newspaper accounts confirm that Jack Swithenby had it last. He donated it back to the AFA, and the first meetings of the new AFA were held at his new bar.
So the Cup competition came back, and so did the celebrations. The Cup had a lid, which you could take off to drink champagne or beer out of it, except in 1920, the first full year of Prohibition. The Brooklyn team that won it that year couldn't officially toast their win at the awards banquet. But I like to think the players found some illegal hooch and did it anyway. That lid is long gone, though. The 1923-24 season was the last official use of the Cup, when Bethlehem Steel won it for a record 6th time.
So that is where it drops out again from the historical record.
Yes, that's when it drops off. But there's a historian for Bethlehem Steel named Dan Morrison, the Reverend Dan, who's done some great research on this. Dan once told me that he'd found evidence that the Cup was still used in the late 1960s and 1970s. Dan had also gone down that hole of chasing down the cup. And to him, and I'm going to quote him here, it's almost like looted art that should be repatriated, end quote. Anyway, he claimed that it became a trophy for a lower-level competition for ethnic clubs, Scottish, German, Italian teams, who were really the ones keeping the game alive during that period. But Reverend Dan hit a dead end somewhere in northern New Jersey.
Which is insane. We're basically talking about Sunday league teams lifting the oldest trophy in American soccer, then bringing it back to their local to drink out of it. We've tried to fill in some of the blanks. You've reached out to people that we know at Sport Club Portuguese and Carney Scots, two clubs that would have won it back then. But so far, there's no sign of it in old photos on the walls or trophy cases in their clubhouses. There may be a Polaroid in a shoebox somewhere, but the problem, and it's one we've already alluded to, is what you historians call the dark ages of American soccer.
Yeah, no, that definitely called the dark ages. And you've helped with the periodization here. It's a bit crude, but you and I have broken out U.S. soccer history into roughly 3 50-year chapters. The first 50 years were the games coming here and almost taking off. A lot of that era revolved around the AFA Cup. People like Thomas Cahill, who we've covered in that first episode, were major sporting figures. And they had every reason to believe that soccer was going to be big. It's going to be something. We had a cup competition, professional leagues, and we even came third in the first World Cup.
Then we hit the next 50 years, from roughly 1935 to 85. With the Depression and World War II, American sports grew and soccer withered on the vine. Kept alive only in that famous win over England at the 1950 World Cup and in ethnic enclaves around the country, the soccer towns that you and I like to celebrate.
Absolutely. I mean, we're children of the Pele generation, so it's kind of percolating in the suburbs as well, but very few people were documenting the game during that period. U.S. soccer had moved headquarters several times in the 20th century, and during one of those moves, almost all the old records were thrown in a dumpster. That should have been a travesty. I mean, it was a travesty, but only a handful of people cared.
Now, some of you might say, well, what about the NASL in the 1970s? That was pretty popular. And it was, briefly, but even at its peak, it was a league of imports.
Yeah, people said that NASL stood for Non-American Soccer League.
But then you get to the latest chapter of U.S. soccer history, the one we're in now, roughly starting with the U.S. qualifying for the 1990 World Cup and including the women's team dominating in the 90s, winning the 91 and 99 World Cups with an Olympic gold in 96. And the success of both national teams helped kickstart what are now thriving domestic leagues in MLS and the NWSL and the USL and a massive, if messy, youth soccer community.
The last few decades have, thankfully, seen more documentation of the game, but there's still that 50-year gap. It's so big that a lot of people forgot that there was anything on the other side. That's why no one knew why Thomas Cahill's nickname was Bullets, until I found the story of him getting shot in an old St. Louis newspaper. It's like that first 50 years had been erased.
Even to people who should know better. Sunil Gulati, the former president of U.S. Soccer, once stated that, quote, U.S. soccer is still in the first half of its life, end quote. Don Garber, commissioner of Major League Soccer, said, quote, America does not have a long-standing soccer tradition, end quote. And our old friend Alexi Lalas called the game that qualified the men's team for the 1990 World Cup, quote, page one, once upon a time, end quote. Now look, we could do a whole episode on dopey stuff Alexi has said, but for three prominent American soccer voices to be telling the same story, a story American soccer fans hear all the time from the rest of the world, a story that's just not true. I know we're in a post-truth era right now, which is a separate and infuriating issue that Tom and I can't change with a soccer podcast, but we can at least fight the misinformation in this little corner of our lives because, as the late Pope John Paul II once said, quote, amongst all unimportant subjects, football is the most important, end quote. And that is the one time you will hear me quoting a pope.
As someone who survived Catholic school and being a former altar boy, I commend you. The late Pope Francis was a member of San Lorenzo Football Club in Argentina. Rest in peace, Franciscus. And word has it that Pope Leo, who spent many years as a missionary in Peru, may be a supporter of Universidad Cesar Vallejo and the Peruvian national team. And of course, Pope John Paul II was a goalkeeper, like us.
I hear his center backs hated him because whenever he let in a goal, he'd say, "Not my fault. I'm infallible."
Yep. I wish I could have used that defense.
And that's why I never did stand up. This part is key, though. Tom and I see 3 distinct chapters of U.S. soccer history, and the second one swallowed up the first, and the AFA Cup along with it.
It did, Kirk, but let me take a moment here to recognize historians who came before me, who kept the torch lit during the Dark Ages. People like Colin Jost, Roger Alloway, and especially Sam Folds, who became the first official U.S. soccer historian in 1969 and spent decades collecting and preserving soccer history. He asked U.S. soccer for one thing, a massive Xerox machine, so he could run off mimeographs and send them around the world. Sam helped found the Society for American Soccer History, or SASH. He did that in 1993, and its mission statement, to document the rich history and heritage of the game in the United States.
They're like the Avengers, but their main superpower is still knowing how to work a microfilm machine.
I still do.
But thanks to their work and your own, Tom, you had been able to peer back in time, discover the AFA Cup, and track it all the way to the present day, which is how, as you will recall from our thrilling opening, Tom followed the trail to Texas. Now, how did the Cup get there?
We have no idea.
And that's our show. Good night, everybody.
No. If you're to believe Reverend Dan, it was somewhere in New Jersey in the 1970s. Then it disappears, before showing up in the Lone Star State sometime in the late 1980s.
Specifically the town of Canton, Texas, home to First Monday Trade Days, the country's oldest and the world's largest flea market. You can still buy and sell just about anything there. Collectibles, cars, even cattle.
And it was there that a drugstore owner from nearby Forney named Phil Saragusa was browsing. Wasn't looking for anything in particular, but he dabbled in antiques a bit. And he walked by this one table. A beat-up-looking trophy stares up at him. It's about 13 inches high.
And why wouldn't it catch his eye, right? It said American Football Association. He assumed it was gridiron football because, what else? He was in Texas. It's Friday Night Lights.
Exactly. So he bought it for an undisclosed amount, brought it home, and stuck it in a vault at a local bank. Saragusa was an interesting guy. Born on a farm in Louisiana, he earned degrees in pharmacy, chemistry, and real estate.
Those are just 3 very obvious things to study together.
He also loved hunting and fly fishing and went to Woodstock.
Again, all of this makes perfect sense. I completely know this person.
And at some point, he realized that his trophy was for soccer, not gridiron football, because he tried to sell it to the National Soccer Hall of Fame in the early 1990s.
The U.S. was about to host its first World Cup in '94, right? We're emerging from the Dark Ages. But remember, the U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame was, no offense, Tom, I know you loved it, the weird place in Oneonta. It didn't have a big acquisitions budget. It was basically soccer goodwill, where you send a bunch of crap you found in Grandpa's attic. So when Phil Saragusa reached out and said, "I found this trophy. Here are all the names of the teams. I got a letter of authenticity from Tiffany. It's yours for, $45,000. The Hall of Fame people probably spit out their coffee.
They weren't prepared for that call. Albert Colon was the director of the Hall at the time. In an interview before he passed away, he told me, and I'm going to quote him here, the history of the game meant little to the U.S. Soccer Federation, and when it did mean something, it was to suit their purposes. The USSF was a mom-and-pop operation. It was a small group of people and volunteers around them. I don't know how they paid the rent." End quote.
Again, it's like the whole first 50 years of U.S. soccer had been erased, and no one wanted to try to recover them because, it represented failure?
Finishing third in the first ever World Cup is failure?
Well, that's a topic for our next episode. But look, for whatever combination of reasons, anti-immigrant bias, the Great Depression, the greed of some of the early soccer bosses, the sport finished its first 50 years with no professional league and very little public interest in the national team. So maybe U.S. soccer figured it was better to pretend it had never happened and make '94 the glorious new birth year for the game.
But as the old saying goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
And as we saw in our first episode on Thomas Cahill, the failures of those early days predicted a lot of the challenges that we saw when they were starting MLS. Too many foreign players, no soccer-specific stadiums. Anyway, in the early 90s, U.S. Soccer wasn't going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a beat-up trophy, but they weren't uninterested.
Almost a year after Saragusa's initial contact, the Hall told them that they were working on getting a wealthy benefactor to buy the trophy. That turned out to be Lamar Hunt, who made his money in oil and helped start the NFL, the NASL, and MLS. Good old Uncle Lamar. The gossip from another historian is that there was a meeting at the Hall of Fame, in a parking lot of all places, and Hunt seemed like he was going to do it. But then he backed off, perhaps after Phil Saragusa sent a notorious fax on February 24th, 1994. It consisted of 2 sentences in all caps.
We price our piece at $100,000. However, if your institution is capable of reducing our tax liability, we will consider an offer.
And
There exists 3 other interested parties.
I didn't know you were watching Landman recently. I genuinely couldn't name one other interested party, much less 3.
So we can't put all the blame on U.S. Soccer. Saragusa was a shifty negotiator. And to their credit, the Hall of Fame tried to get Saragusa to donate the trophy in late 1995 after the successful 94 World Cup. But it didn't go anywhere because he really wanted to make some money on it.
Jump to the early 2000s when a new employee at the Hall stumbled on all the Saragusa correspondence. He wrote in an internal email, quote, "Do we have a price for this cup? We may now have a source for the cash. I mean, a real source. Have we photos of this trophy? Is it the first American soccer trophy? What's its claim to fame?"
What's its claim to fame? It's the oldest sports trophy in the country. Again, the Dark Ages. Even someone at the National Soccer Hall of Fame doesn't know about the first 5 decades of U.S. soccer history.
And I'd argue that another of the Cup's claims to fame is the fact that it's still around, from the top prize in the sport to totally unappreciated. But just like the game, it survived. And we have to mention another old cup here, the U.S. Open Cup. The knockout competition started in 1913.
And now you may know it as the Lamar Hunt Open Cup because it was renamed for Uncle Lamar. And you may also know it as the thing that MLS clubs usually end up winning. But the fact is, yes, it has survived more, but the AFA Cup is still around. And there was Tom in 2018 pulling into a bank parking lot on Main Street in Forney, Texas to meet Phil Saragusa and see the trophy.
Yeah, this is a huge moment. So I brought the guy who shot our documentary, Soccer Town USA, to film it. We filmed Phil opening the vault, taking out a multicolored satchel with the trophy inside. But, truth be told, I wasn't all that impressed. It was light, it was tarnished, it had nicks, and what appeared to be some fire damage. And the lid was long gone. The engraving was beautiful, though.
Still, had to be incredible holding all that history, right? I mean, it was the end of the quest.
Oh, yeah. I literally had a blank check in my pocket. And I asked him, "How much will you sell it to me for?" He said north of what he wanted in the 1990s, and I knew I couldn't play in that category. But he also said that he believed it belonged in a museum so everybody could see it. So there's this tension there. He wants to sell it, and he wants to see it in a museum. I mean, what's it going to be?
It's funny, though. He could have sold it for something. Maybe part of him liked the occasional bursts of attention, right? Knowing that he had treasure. You know, he seems to have been a big personality, and getting people to fight over it, to make him the center of their attention, maybe that was tough to give up.
The day after we met, we had a symposium for SASH. It was nearby at the new Hall of Fame, so I asked Phil if he could bring the trophy over. We revealed it in a room of hardcore American soccer history nerds.
I'm picturing a lot of honking and fainting.
No feigning.
The amount of palm sweat, though, it must have been off the charts.
There were historians taking pictures with the cup, I'll say that. My friend David Kilpatrick, New York Cosmos historian, called it the holy grail of American soccer. Look, U.S. soccer currently has 1913 as its origin date, even though they ignore 30, 40 years of American soccer history. Kirkpatrick thinks that the AFA Cup justifies moving that date back to 1884 and the first attempt at a national competition. Anyway, about the same time, Phil tried to sell it again to U.S. Soccer. And once again, no offer. I was told it was awkward. Unfortunately, Phil passed in 2022, and now his son, Phil Jr., is responsible for one of the oldest prizes in American sports.
And it went right back into the vault. So what's it worth?
That's what people always ask me, right? I've asked a lot of people for their guesstimates, educated guesses, and I've gotten from a few $1,000 to $75,000. That high estimate came from an expert who said, at the end of the day, this is a piece of fine art. It has beauty and significance. It's important, but right now it's a wreck cup. It has no real value. It needs to be repaired. Then you have something.
It's true. It is missing the lid, right, with the Roman athlete on it, and one of the crossbars is missing. Plus, as you saw, it's got the dings and the dents and the fire damage. I guess you could get it fixed up, but part of me also feels like the damage is part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hell of a story. My friend David Kilpatrick is doing some consulting work with the FIFA Museum right now, and he told them about my work on the AFA Cup. He showed them some images, and they were blown away that it exists. He asked me to call Phil Jr., which I did, and I asked him if I could put him in touch with the folks at the museum. He was eager and grateful. So there have been talks, and maybe a loan can be worked out. And it can be displayed during the World Cup next year. I mean, I hope so. It's an important artifact. Literally, part art, part fact.
You know, when people say we have no soccer history in this country, we can pull out the AFA Cup and say, here, this competition existed. It's as old as nearly any other in the world. And yeah, if it's a bit beat up, a bit tarnished, not quite as impressive as you'd like it to be, well, you know what? It's still here. And that, Alexi, is our page one. The AFA Cup is a bridge from us across that 50-year dark age to the raucous, messy, imperfect, but very real first 50 years of American soccer. If the game struggled to be embraced back then because it was an immigrant game, well,
now's a perfect time to claim it as an American game.
And that's our story. We'll be back soon with an incredible look back at the United States in the first ever World Cup almost 100 years ago, when the ball was heavy and the shorts were denim.
Tune in to see if we use the word worsted again.
In the meantime, if you liked hearing about the AFA Cup or want more rants about Alexi Lalas, let us know. Follow the show, share it on your socials, share it with a friend.
And remember, if you're an American soccer fan, these are your stories. This is our history.
Let's celebrate it together.
Indeed.
USA, USA, USA.
This episode of An American Game is a production of Soccertown Media and was written by me, Kirk Riddell.
And me, Tom McCabe.
If you want to hear more of my thoughts on soccer, Hollywood, or whatever I happen to be annoyed by, you can find me on Blue Sky at rudell@bsky.com.
As for me, Kirk will have me in the archives digging up the next story. And on the Soccertown Media Instagram.
An American Game is a team effort. Our supervising producer and editor is Matthew Nelson.
Our videos are produced by Larry Garrity.
Our theme music was composed by our old friend and former teammate, Patrick White.
Special thanks to the Society for American Soccer History.
And thank you for listening. That makes you part of the team. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends.
We'll see you next week.